We have been living in our house now for about 12 years or so, give or take. Myself, my husband, and our daughter. I am a registered nurse and work crazy hours. This becomes important later on. It's a nice little neighborhood on a busy street. It's a cut-through from two different main streets with a Farmer Jack and McDonald's at the end of the street, so it's just busy. Busier than we thought it would have been. The neighbors are civil. Some older, some younger. Some we still haven't even talked to yet. But the neighbor to our west, her and her husband are some characters. We haven't gotten along since day one. It's always a problem with her. Like petty shit, too. Clearly they're on drugs and or sell drugs. There's constant traffic over there. A lot of times people just go to her mailbox and grab something and leave. Their daughter comes and goes as well. Between fights with her boyfriend and screaming matches with her parents, it gets loud at times. We've butted heads numerous times. Even had to put up a privacy fence so we could try to enjoy hanging out in the backyard in the summers. She's always yelling at us to shut the dog up, but it's okay for hers to bark at all hours of the night. So last week, my daughter was off to school and husband was at work. I had my coffee and hopped in the shower to get ready for work. After a few minutes, I hear someone pounding on the front door. At first, I didn't think much of it. The UPS man always knocked like the police and scared the shit out of me every time he delivered packages, which I was expecting that morning. The pounding on the door became very persistent, like I knew it wasn't a delivery now. I got out of the shower, threw on a towel with soap all over me and shampoo in my hair still. I get to the door and it's my crazy neighbor, pounding on my front window screaming, "Help, I need help, please help me." I opened the door and said, "What the fuck? I'm in the shower, what's wrong?" She said, "My husband isn't breathing, and I know you're a nurse, please help me." So I threw my robe on and ran next door, towel still on my head. Her husband lay there unresponsive. She had already called 911, so I began giving him CPR until they arrived. They took over. They were unable to revive him. He did have respiratory issues, but my neighbor said he was up a few hours ago. Then she went to wake him for breakfast and got no response. As a nurse, I knew as soon as I saw him that he'd passed some time ago. Fluids were draining from his body, but I tried like hell for her. We cried and hugged for hours. She thanked me for everything I did. It's been hard seeing her. She's devastated. I'm also traumatized even though I deal with these types of situations every day. This one hit different. When I was 15, my family decided to finally take a vacation. We didn't travel much, so getting away felt exciting. We chose a place nearby yet remote, a large lake in the mountains. The drive there was peaceful, and the cabin we rented was cozy and quiet. My dad couldn't join us right away because of work, but he'd planned to come later. The first full day, we went down to the lake to swim. The water was crystal clear, and the scenery was amazing. The next day, my uncle took us to a secluded spot he'd found while paddleboarding. He said it had the best cliffs for jumping into the water. We paddled to a cove that could only be reached by water, with tall rocks surrounding it. We spent hours climbing and jumping off those cliffs. It was a thrill, leaping into the cold, deep water. One massive rock stood far out in the lake, bigger and taller than the rest. None of us dared to swim to it, but we all stared at it, wondering what it'd be like to jump from there. Later that day, my dad finally arrived. We told him about our cliff-jumping adventure, and he seemed eager to check it out himself. Everyone else was too tired, so it was just the two of us. Without a paddleboard, we'd have to swim from one rock to the next. At first, it was fun. Swim, climb, jump, repeat. Then my dad suggested we go to the big rock out in the lake. I didn't want to, but I didn't want to seem scared either, so I agreed. The swim felt endless. I've always been a strong swimmer, but something about that stretch felt different. The water seemed colder and heavier, almost pulling at me. When we finally reached the rock, its jagged edges made climbing tough. My dad boosted me up first, then followed. Standing on top, the rock felt enormous. It towered over the water, and everything below looked so far away. My dad jumped first. I watched him fall for what felt like forever before he hit the water with a loud slap. Then, nothing. He didn't come back up right away. Seconds passed and my chest tightened with panic. Finally, he surfaced, gasping for air. His face was pale, and he looked shaken. When I asked if he was okay, he just forced a weak smile and laughed nervously. Big jump, huh? But there was something off about him, his eyes, his tone. He insisted I jump too. Reluctantly, I did. The fall wasn't as bad as I thought, but the water, it felt strange, heavy, cold, almost alive. When I came up, my dad was already swimming back to shore. He didn't say a word, but his frantic pace made me follow without question. Back at the beach, my dad pulled my mom and grandparents aside. They talked in hushed tones, their faces growing serious. A few minutes later, I heard sirens. Police and an ambulance showed up, heading toward the water. We stayed for the rest of the trip, but my dad didn't mention the rock again. 2 years later, I overheard him telling someone what he'd seen beneath the surface of that big rock. A body. Bloated, lifeless, floating in the shadows below. He refuses to talk about it to this day. We've never gone back to that lake, and we never will.
I'm a 19-year-old from a small town who used to love urban exploring. There was something thrilling about stepping into places long abandoned, piecing together forgotten histories. But after what happened one night, I'll never set foot in a place like that again. It started when a night out at the movies got canceled. I didn't want to waste the evening, so I hit up a friend, Mason, who had been going through a rough time lately. Normally, I didn't like bringing people along for safety reasons, but Mason had explored with me before, and nothing bad had ever happened. I reached out to an old contact for a new spot and was sent the location of a small abandoned school near the edge of downtown. We drove there, parked nearby, and started scouting for a way inside. The building was fenced off, and the only way in was through a small gap in the back. Unfortunately, there were people hanging around that area, so we decided to check out another spot nearby. But that place was a bust too, doors nailed shut, no way in. Determined, we went back to the school. The people were still there, but I figured we could sneak in quickly and avoid them. The fencing was layered. The first had just enough room to roll under, and the second had a narrow gap we could squeeze through. We made it past both and into the schoolyard. I climbed onto a low roof between two sections of the building to scout ahead while Mason stayed below. That's when I heard a man yell, "What the hell are you doing on my property?" My stomach dropped. At first I thought it might be the cops, but when I looked down, I saw a man charging toward Mason, holding a bat. Mason started backing away, saying, "We'll leave." But the man didn't care. He swung the bat, hitting Mason in the ribs, then again on his arm. Mason fell to the ground, bleeding and crying out in pain. I froze on the roof, my heart pounding in my chest. The man looked up and locked eyes with me. He yelled, "You're not leaving. Both of you are dead." Then he started climbing up toward me. Without thinking, I screamed at Mason. Mason scrambled toward the gap in the fence, clutching his side. The man turned his attention back to him, and I knew it was my chance. I jumped off the roof, pain shooting through my legs as I hit the ground, and bolted toward the first fence. I rolled under it, tearing my jacket in the process, and saw Mason crawling under the second fence ahead of me. Blood soaked his shirt, and his face was swollen and battered, but he kept moving. We reached his car, and I told him to get in mine instead. I didn't want him driving in his condition. As we sped away, I spotted a police car parked nearby. I pulled over, ran up to it, and knocked on the window, but no one was inside. When I got back to my car, Mason was slumped in the passenger seat, holding his wrist, blood dripping everywhere. He looked at me with dazed eyes and said, "Thank you for being here. I'm so cold." I screamed at the top of my lungs, trying to keep him conscious as I raced to the hospital. By the time we got there, we were both covered in blood. People in the ER stared as I begged for help. The doctors rushed Mason into a room, cutting away his clothes and working on his injuries. He had a broken wrist, a gash on his head that needed staples, and a fractured nose. When they asked what happened, I lied, saying we were mugged in an alley. If I had told the truth, we could have faced trespassing charges. After everything, Mason's mom came to thank me, but I couldn't shake the guilt. I kept replaying the moment I froze on the roof, wondering if I could have done more. Urban exploring used to be my escape, a way to satisfy my curiosity. Now it's a reminder of how quickly things can go horribly wrong. To anyone thinking of trying it, be careful. You never know who or what you might run into. Sometimes it's not worth the risk.